Virgin Media Shorts, championing undiscovered talent.
Right, hello everyone, thanks for coming. This panel's all about pitching. My name's Jude Goldrei and I'm a producer, but I previously worked for Life Size Pictures and we used to run the old UK Film Council short film schemes. So I spent a few years having lots of people pitch to me. I was on a lot of sort of panels selecting shorts for funding. I've sort of now on both sides of the table, because now that I'm a producer, I find myself having to pitch a lot to people. So after spending years of giving people advice about how to pitch, I'm now having to do it. And I have to say it is really hard. Whatever anyone says, it can be really hard, even just to tell someone what your project is about. So I'm really interested to hear what our panel have to say. We've got a really great panel who can bring really different perspectives on this subject. I'll introduce them all in a minute. Just wanted to know whether, have any of you had to pitch in a formal environment? Show of hands. There's quite a few of you. What sort of thing?
Advertising.
Advertising, okay. Anything else?
Like short film, like going to pitch our short films.
For funding?
Within our university.
Oh, within the university, okay. Anything else? Sorry? Marketing campaigns, okay, great.
Creative media program, participatory program for the topic.
Okay, brilliant. Anything else? Yeah.
Pitching to BBC for a series idea.
Okay, great. So there's quite a variety of things. And how many of you are like writers? We've got a few writers and producers and directors. Okay, so we've got a complete spread here, so that's really good to know. All right, yes, if I could just ask each of you to just say what you do and how you have to get involved with pitching or being pitched to. Will.
Hello everyone, my name's Will Massa. I work at British Council Film so I'm a senior film advisor in the film department, but more relevant for this panel, I have for the past 2 years worked as head of development on a national short film initiative called Collaborate, which is run through Rankin Film Productions with Bureau, Nokia and Dazed Confused. And before that I was an exec at one of the old screen agencies called Vision and Media, where I was in charge of new talent and allocating funds for short film projects and feature film development funding as well. So that's my kind of experience, I suppose.
Great, thanks. Damien?
Hello everyone. My name's Damien Spandley. I'm head of theatrical. I'm quite new. I'm still remembering my job title. It's quite long. I'm head of theatrical and new TV and new media. Well, it might be digital. I can't remember. At Metrodome. We're a theatrical and DVD and VOD distributor. We distribute in cinemas around 10 to 12 films a year. But beyond that, over the course of a year, we will put out over 50 titles on through our DVD business and also on VOD platforms and into TV. My job is I run the theatrical division and oversee TV and VOD. So in my job, I suppose, I mean, I also pitch and am pitched to. I pitch our movies to cinemas, to the guys and girls that book cinemas nationwide, and then I am pitched to when we go to market, and generally as part of our acquisitions process. And because we release small movies, which may only just go straight to video or just play on VOD platforms, up to films that play, may play on 100 prints nationwide in cinemas, we do sort of. We get to be pitched directly by producers, but also in the main by sales agents at markets like Cannes and Berlin, where you have a 15 or half an hour appointment with a sales agent, and they pitch to you their slate. Prior to that, I also was a programmer myself for Pitch House Cinemas, where I was regularly pitched to by distributors.
Great. David?
Hello, my name's David Pope. My working life is split between working as a filmmaker, a consultant, a training provider. So I'm a feature film writer director. As a consultant, I work principally on development, on slates and single projects. Currently working on a slate of post-Arab Spring projects out of Egypt, really on establishing slate identity and selecting projects for that slate, and then as that progresses, moving into sort of script development stage. And a training provider, so I teach and facilitate and train in different environments, sort of spectrum from sort of film school to university to sort of professional development programs such as the Rotterdam Lab at Cinemart, Cannes Cine Foundation, which are geared towards people who are moving from shorts to features or kind of in their first feature phase. So I guess what binds all that together really is story. So all of those things revolve around story in one way or another. And I guess in terms of pitching, I pitch my own projects as a filmmaker, and pitching kind of finds its way into those kind of training situations and consultant situations as well, where I'm working with people to sort of develop pitches or kind of advising people on, I guess, how to bring out the best in their projects.
Brilliant, thanks everyone. I think might be useful to start by, because we'll all have different perspectives on this, but just to start by thinking about what do we actually mean by a pitch, and why do we need to pitch? Why do we need to do it? David, do you want to maybe start, like in reality, what type of, like generally in the UK, what type of pitching do you think people need to do?
I think there's a couple of things I should just say. First thing I'll say, everything that I'm going to say is my opinion, and it's kind of shouldn't be in any way perceived as any kind of industry reality, because I don't believe there is an industry reality. I think there's lots of people with different opinions and different economic and political positions that, depending on what their job descriptions are. So anything I say is coming from my kind of opinion. First thing to say is I hate the word pitching. It's because for me, what I think the kind of area of activity that we're involved in talking about here, at its best, it's really about a conversation and having a conversation about something. And that conversation is hopefully going to lead into a relationship and of some kind, creative or business relationship. Pitching implies to me that you're throwing something at somebody, and I know it doesn't sound like a good way to start a relationship. So I kind of like the idea that you're trying to enter into a conversation. So anything that can kind of de-industrialise that process, I think, is good, because I think we all like to talk as human beings, and eventually we're talking about stories and projects and things like that. So that's the first thing to say, about pitching. Don't like the word pitching, but that's okay. The second thing to say is that I don't think there's anybody who likes doing it. I think everyone hates doing it. It's a necessity, and if you're a creative person, it can very often be seen as a reductive process. So you're kind of trying to strip everything down to something that's smaller, and that's not necessarily a pleasant experience, but you've got to get over it, because that's a reality that you're going to have to deal with, whatever your kind of job description is. I think that so in reality, I think a lot of pitching takes place in 2-3 people sitting at a table having a conversation about a project, and then there are kind of the more structured environments that exist that I've kind of had experience of, which would be things like Cinemart at Rotterdam Lab and Berlin Co-Production Market and things like that, where essentially you're sitting at a table, usually the writer, director, and the producer, and you're kind of meeting a series of broadcasters, distributors, financiers, and you pretty much have to talk about your project 20 times over 3 days. And so that's kind of an environment that where it might come up. And I think the other thing is that I would say you don't know when it's going to happen. It might be 2:00 in the morning in Cannes when everyone's had too much to drink, and you meet someone at a party and you think, actually, this person would really like my project, and you've got about 30 seconds to do it. All the way through to an hour meeting where they've read everything, seen everything, know everything about you, and what are you going to talk about for an hour? So I think the challenge is probably fall between those 2 points. Is that?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Will? Do you think, how long is a pitch? What do you think the purpose of a pitch is, and when would you need to do it?
Well, just to echo some of the things that David was saying, there's kind of pitching with a capital P and pitching with a small p. I mean, there are a number of set established environments in which you might go into pitch. Festivals do it increasingly for kind of anything from prize money to something like DocFest has a lot of pitching, for, where you pitch to commissioners, for example, and financiers. So those are formal environments in which you need to, the time frame has probably been allocated for you, and you should prepare accordingly for that. Pitching with a small p, how long should it be? I don't know. I think the point about pitching with a small p is that filmmakers need to, depending on the project that they're working on, develop a kind of framework for articulating what it is that's special or interesting about the project that they're developing. And if they are in more of a social environment, which it seems to me we don't do so much formal pitching in this country, so a lot of interest gets generated over, unless you're at kind of a big film market, it gets generated over those conversations that you happen either ad hoc. And I think developing social skills and navigating the nuances of recognising when someone might not be interested or the time might not be right, it to an extent will determine how long you're going to pitch them your project. But I think more generally it's about getting, you are kind of pitching all the time, really, if you're developing a career, whether you're writing a one page, that's pitching, it's just not standing up and pitching and talking about it. But knowing your projects inside out and knowing what makes them attractive and being conversant about yourself as a filmmaker and your influence as a filmmaker, what your project's like, having your references kind of handy, there's this whole kind of toolkit that I think filmmakers are able to develop for the pitching with a small p, which means you can be succinct without being reductive, kind of able to front load and understand the hierarchy of information that people will be interested in when they're talking to you, like the genre of your project, if you have any talent attached, what makes it original. It's like this film, but think of this film, but it's a bit different, that kind of stuff. Not just kind of standing in front of people when they ask you what your project is and saying, and then the man goes into the shop and then he saw a cat and then, it's because and I think a lot of filmmakers would say, well, that is reductive. My film is genre busting and it's a hybrid documentary form and you wouldn't understand unless you saw it. It's a social industry, people are talking, and you do have to develop a shorthand about yourself and about your work, and it all has to be shot through with charisma and a smile, really. So I do think it's difficult and it's nebulous and it's social, but I think it's actually easier when you're given a formal environment to do it in, because anyone like you guys who've worked in advertising, you know the brief, you know the kind of etiquette and the shorthand and the you know your storyboards that you have to prepare. You have to get X, Y, Z across in 15 minutes. Being clever and fun about your project and making it stand out from the 100 other pitches that someone might have had at a Cannes cocktail party is a bit of a dark art, and when people do it well, I think it probably looks like they haven't thought about it at all, but actually the opposite is true, and they've spent a lot of time thinking about the way in which they're going to talk about themselves and about their projects. So I know it's not particularly concrete, but I think it's part of your filmmaker toolkit is talking about yourself and talking about your work and being articulate and succinct. That's what I would say.
So I suppose on a basic level, it's being able to say what your project is about in like a couple of sentences. Yeah. Which sounds really easy, but actually I've been caught out a few times when I've been completely engrossed in a script and then someone said, "Oh, what's this project about?" And I've literally tried to say, and it's just kind of gone horribly wrong, and I've kind of gone, it should be really easy. I obviously don't know, I haven't got there yet. Yeah. So,
and I think particularly if you've got a genre project, for example, that has what you would call a high concept or a strong hook, if you can't deliver that hook very quickly and hook someone into the conversation, I think you've got trouble, because that's the project you're trying to pitch. You want them to be excited about the idea. You've got to excite them because the film hasn't been made yet. So how do you do that? How do you get someone's eyes to light up? I think it's really difficult.
Yeah. And Damien, is this sort of similar to your experience of pitching or?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I would say, for the one thing that perhaps I would say is that certainly in the kind of pitching that I listen to and dish out is that it's important to have an understanding of why you're pitching to that person. So, for instance, if I'm pitching a film to a cinema booker, I have to understand the world in which they live. And then, so in that case, I mean, you mentioned, Will mentioned genre, so you're sort of painting a picture of actually the commerciality of the project. So and you can do that by having a sort of good knowledge or researching projects that are similar. Having an idea of who the audience is. I mean, I think this is relevant for short films as well as it is for features. Is that everybody goes to the cinema, everybody understands the kind of movies that they like, and although you may not be mimicking the project, you can point to their audience, or in my case, often to comp figures. We actually do a lot of analysis on certain films, and for me, the more recent that film is, the better. So if you're pitching a gangster film and you say, oh, listen, it's Scarface meets Goodfellas, that's great, and it paints a kind of picture of what the themes and perhaps the style of that movie, and that's absolutely valid. But at the same time, I'd want to know, which audience are going to go and see that film. So I want you to look at more recent movies and say, well, we see it as this audience. I mean, I'm at the moment pitching in a film called Summer in February to cinemas around the country, and it's a Dominic Cooper, Dan Stevens from Downton Abbey, but you should all know that really. And it's a period drama with for an older audience. So I'm using Best Exotic Marigold Hotel and Quartet as part of my pitch into cinemas, and they get that straight away. And it's to the extent actually where I'm even sending them comparative figures against cinemas to show them how my film I think will perform, and I think that's very important.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'd like to come back a bit later actually and talk a bit more in detail about what you all think should go into pitches, depending on who's pitching as well. But it's fascinating thinking about a sales point of view, and I actually recently shadowed a sales company, and I do recommend any producers, or if you ever get a chance to get a bit of insight to a sales company, it's really, really useful because you see a completely different side, and it's very much kind of the business side of where your film's going to go, and it's very useful in terms of thinking about your films sort of earlier on. So I guess, whose job is it to pitch? Do we all need to be able to do it, or is it more of a producer's job, or what do you think, Will?
I suppose again, it's coming back to that kind of big P, small p pitching. I suppose in those formal environments, and I imagine in the environments that you work at, it tends to be the producer that will lead on a discussion like that, whether or not they're bringing the writer and a kind of director, or in some cases talent, to the table as well, to give that sense of the project as a whole. And I guess it depends how slick and rehearsed you want it to be. Your natural inclination is the producer, because they're the people that tend to be going around raising the finance and pulling the whole project together, creatively, logistically, financially, etc. I think if you're at an earlier stage in your career and you are in kind of perhaps slightly one of these more contrived environments. I mean, there's a lot of public pitching, I've noticed, at festivals and events, which seems like a kind of almost a theatre of cruelty to me slightly. It can be good. It's good. It's not a bad idea to get good at working on your presentation skills in public, but it doesn't bear any resemblance to what actually kind of happens in the industry more broadly. But I think if you're part of a team and someone is particularly good at talking about their project, or the producer of that project happens to be petrified, although that might, and shy and reticent to talk about it, although that may be a problem for that producer in the longer term, I don't think there's any harm if you've got a particularly good salesperson or someone with kind of oozing charisma on that team. I don't think it's a problem for anyone to talk about a project necessarily. And indeed, when you're not together and you're working on a project, as a writer, writers, I think they can kind of slightly worm their way out of it because they think the writing will speak for itself. But I think writers need to be kind of almost as good as producers in terms of talking about their own work, which is hard because they spend a lot of time banging their head against a desk in a bedroom somewhere. But yeah, I don't think there's anyone better. But I mean, it tends to be producers, doesn't it, generally?
So do you think that there's kind of with this word pitching that's horrible, do you think some of those kind of competitions give a sort of misconception about what a pitch is? Do you think it leads to the idea that it's sort of some big theatre style or some X Factor style situation?
I think there's a couple of things to say. I mean, I think that it's absolutely fair to say that kind of those kind of environments are. That's not how it is in the world. In the world, it's usually 2 or 3 people sitting around a table. For new entrant talent, I think if you ramp it up into a competitive state, I think it can be negative. If it's simply the fact that it's a public environment and people are pitching to people from the industry, it can be useful in a number of ways. One is that the new entrant talent may not have found a way to actually present their projects to people before. The second thing is confidence, and I think that confidence is probably a huge issue. And standing up in front of a room full of people and talking about your work is going to help you with that confidence. But it is fair to say that, and it probably is theatre of cruelty, but if you can get through the theatre of cruelty, after that it's going to be a lot easier, because it's probably going to be a bunch of kind of like-minded people who are actually, despite the fact that they do different jobs in the industry, are all there because they want to get films made and get films out in front of people. And that's kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's an important thing about who pitches. I mean, I think everyone pitches in one way or another. If you're in a situation where the writer, director, and the producer are there, it's important that you understand who should be talking about what.
Okay.
People expect certain things to come from the producer. They expect certain things to come from the director. And you need to have done your preparation. That you're singing from the same hymn sheet in one way, but you're also talking about areas that are relevant to your job description.
Okay, and just briefly, what would we expect from a writer and a director? If we had a writer, director, producer team.
If you've got a director attached, the writer tends to become superfluous to that situation, unless they're a kind of producer on the project or something more complex than that. But let's say it's the director, or a writer, director, and a producer. The producer is expected to talk about the assets on the project, so whether that's financing, the finance plan, financing in place, and if it was just the producer, then they would be needing to talk about talent, which includes the director, so they need to be able to talk about and performers. And if the director isn't there, then again, and the producer needs to be able to talk about the story. There's a whole bunch of stuff that the producer needs to be able to do if there isn't another representative of the team there. The director really should be talking about story. It might, again, kind of going into opinion territory. Should be talking about story, because the director's job's to tell the story. There are kind of other things you should be thinking about that I think people want to hear from a director. They want to kind of hear a bit of director talk. They want to kind of see a little bit of director performance, by which I mean that the director can talk about the mood and tone of the piece. They probably want to hear why the director wants to tell that story.
Right. Yeah.
You might not it might not be the answer that you give. You might not say the reason that you want to tell this story is, because that might be personal or whatever. But have an answer. Because if someone says to you, so why do you want to tell this story? It's the same as, if you ask a producer, so who's the audience for this film? Yeah. It's like, if you don't have an answer, that conversation's over.
Yeah.
So if you are a director, I think you need to really think about having an answer that kind of, wherever that, I don't know, maybe if that's something we're going to talk about. But.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think actually sometimes a writer might have to be more vocal if you're on a sort of, looking for some development money, or you're on a project where the script's going to be developed for a long period of time. Lots of kind of public funded schemes are like that. So writer might have to really go into where they are with the story.
And scale of project. Yeah. I mean, if you're on a bigger scale project, the writer might have been retained to do some work on the project, so they might be working with the director, working with the cast, so they still are a kind of a productive part of the team, rather than the script's been sold and done and they've been given the check. They're actually involved during the making of the film. So, yeah.
Can I just say, I think, especially for talent right at the beginning of their careers, out of film school, etc., a lot of a lot of the time you hear about new filmmakers kind of lamenting the fact that they all they know as writers, they don't know any producers to get their projects off the ground, or I've got a pile of scripts but I don't know any directors. You know, when you go to a film festival, in a sense, again, you're pitching yourself, and if you know there's a producer out there that produced a really good short and you'd love to get them your script, as a writer you have to then say, here's my, would you consider working with me?
Yeah.
And they're going to want to be excited by you, and vice versa.
Absolutely, yeah, so it's really important then. One thing I've noticed actually about being in sort of panels for shorts or features, when you've kind of got people commissioning, they often, when they're sort of talking about the teams, panels often talk about how together they think the team are. And that will always come up, and I think they'll say, they're a very strong team, they're all on the same page. So it's really important to kind of get that together if you are in that sort of formal situation.
I think you're not just being judged on the project. You're being judged on how likely you are going to deliver that project.
Yeah.
I think that is very important, and so it's very important, for instance, not to over pitch the project. So you're selling an idea, but I've listened to pitches where they're going for unobtainable, ambitious talent, and we think that the budget is too high, and they're really overselling the project, and actually you're actually being judged not just on that sort of spark, that X factor, or even on how commercial your movie is. You're being judged on really sort of practical level as well. Can the producer deliver the project? Does the writer have a clear enough idea to complete the script? Is the financing realistic? Will they be able to deliver the film under the budget? And lots of really, so that's why, so you need to sort of research and be sort of, be realistic. And if you go over the top, and that's one of the things why those sort of commissioning shows, X Factor style sort of formats, often they bring out the sort of showmanship in a group of filmmakers, and everybody enjoys the process and the entertainment value of it. But actually behind that, it needs to be a very sort of solid and very realistic, plan.
Yeah, otherwise it's a bit off-putting, isn't it, when it's a bit over the top. So let's talk a bit more about what should go into a pitch. And just sort of going back to casting, should people always talk about casting, even if it's just to give, like if you don't have anyone attached, should people say, we would like to cast someone like? Is that a good thing to include in a pitch, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the thing is, it also depends on the kind of project as well. I mean, on my way out the office, I went to our head of acquisitions and said, do you have anything that I can, pass on? And he said, genre. I said, thanks, Giles. And so, so if you're making a sort of low-budget horror movie, it's not so important to have. I mean, you would give an idea of the cast, young, attractive cast, or whatever, or if it was, but if it, so I think that's important to know, is that some projects you always need to give an idea of cast. Before we would acquire a movie, we'd need to see a script. Oh no, we're back.
Air conditioning's gone back on. Can it go off, please?
So before we would actually join a project, sort of, it's very sort of basic, but I think it's important to sort of just point out that we'd want to see most likely a completed script, or at least a sort of a very. We're just about to board a movie where we haven't seen a script because the filmmaker. That's how the filmmaker works, sort of a very improvisational process. But normally you'd want to see a script. You want to have an idea of cast. Ideally, you have the cast attached. But if it is a horror movie, perhaps not so important. And obviously, you'd need to understand the financing model as well. But I think for cast, I think it's important. I mean, it's a very straightforward thing to get wrong, where you just say, oh no, we've somebody has shown interest, Angelina Jolie has shown interest in our Hungarian goat drama, and you say, well, that's not going to work. But I think if you leave it, you've got to have a sort of, you've got to know how to answer all of the questions that are possibly going to come your way. And if somebody asks you about cast and you say, oh, we haven't really thought about that yet, then the pitch it's over. Really.
And that's it for the director
so
as well.
bad.
I think if that question goes to the director and like, who do you kind of feel for these, and you don't have an answer, then It's like, what are you doing in the chair?
Yeah.
You know, what's your job? Sorry. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that, you know, there is attempt. You know, people try to get certain performers for their films, and you know, if you've got a good actor who you really like reading the script, that's great. I think people are slightly suspicious of names being bandied around in a conversation. I mean, to be honest, if I was a producer and somebody came, or if I was a producer talking to me, I'd want to see a letter of intent.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Otherwise, I would kind of say it's someone like that.
Yeah.
And
So
obviously, you need to be budget. You need to be realistic about your
About the
budgets and
budget,
things like.
yeah.
But a letter of intent, as we know, means everything and nothing in the industry, because it's, you know, it means that someone has looked at it, but it will say, you know, pending contracts, et cetera, terms and conditions. So and so is interested in the role of so and so. Now that does mean a lot, but it's not a contract. But then I think you can actually show that somebody is showing interest in the project. Otherwise, I think you need to be really careful, because I think people's radar starts.
It looks bad,
yeah.
doesn't it? But if you did have Brad Pitt attached, could you, and you had a letter of intent, bring that? You
Yeah.
know, people
Bring it.
might actually.
But also just to carry on from what David's saying, is that cast, you've got to, if you're going to talk about cast, or even as a kind of wish list of people that you might pay, cast also have shorthand connotations. So if you say, think Ben Whishaw, for example, it conjures up a certain idea of the kind of part, which is to say Ben Whishaw can only act in one part, but to date he's done quite sort of, you know, kind of slightly foppish, or if you say, you know, think Paul Giamatti, who tends to be quite, you know, slightly kind of indie figure, and the other thing is that, and you'll know much more about this than me, but cast is asset in terms of selling a film at the other end, and there are certain, you know, if you're developing a drama and you've got someone down who's predominantly acted in TV soaps to date, probably alarm bells are going to be ringing. I can't sell a film off the back of this person. It's totally inappropriate for you to. So if you're going to talk about it at all, think very carefully about the references that you're going to use, and possibly the same applies to comparable films, unless, you know, if you're talking about tone, actors suggest tone in the way that comparable films suggest tone. If you say think Pan's Labyrinth, that takes you down a very particular tonal area. I'm getting off track, but be careful about what you know.
It's a really good point. I mean, with casting, like, is there a good way to kind of find out who sort of get some casting suggestions? Like, I know, maybe just make friends with sales agents, because when I started hanging around a sales company, just constant talk of casting, and I learnt so much, but it was interesting how what was kind of small list of names actually meant something at that time. What's a good way to find that out?
Well, I think I think it depends on the size of project. I mean, if you're if you're bringing in a sales agent, if you're putting together a feature film and you're at a point where you have a sort of foundation of financing, you have a script, you have a director, and you're kind of getting there. You would then perhaps bring in a sales agent to have a look at the project with a view to them actually coming on board. They could complete the financing, and they would obviously advise you.
Yeah.
And my last job was with a company that was both a film distribution company and an international sales agent.
Right.
And it was quite interesting seeing the sort of reaction between the two sort of divisions of the company to certain talent suggestions, for instance. So you say, so for instance, someone say, this movie has Danny Dyer in it, and the UK side would go, great, that's DVD sales through the roof, fantastic. We're going to have a really good Christmas party this year, and the international will go, oh, no, because we can't sell him abroad. And I hope he doesn't see this actually, so come after me. But so I think that I think with casting you should just talk to everybody. And anybody, and because it's such a huge area, it's so
and there's lots of different opinions as well as like actual kind of figures and facts. But
absolutely,
and casting directors. I mean, that's they are good. Good casting directors are good at looking at a budget range and kind of understanding kind of what kind of money there might be involved in the project and what kind of talent might be available for that kind of budget. And so I think. Yeah. As a producer,
you can't sort of underestimate how powerful the agents are as well. Because
that's true.
These guys, they don't just sort of represent the business interests of their of their clients. they're actually kind of part of the filmmaking process as well. But they're in the room. They the big US agents actually develop the films themselves for their clients, and so there's so many different areas you can take advice from and take value from.
That sounds like really good advice, asking lots of different people, because I've definitely heard people who've actually had some consultants sort of with a casting agent who've then given some casting ideas that have not gone down well with other people. So it definitely sounds like a good idea to ask.
I think you really need to take it. I think there's something here about really talking to people who are making the same and making and financing and distributing the same kind of films that you do, because there are. I kind of work in sort of different environments in terms of filmmaking, and in terms of your sort of European art house films, it's the director, it's director driven, it's auteur driven. The cast has an aspect to it, but they're going to be trying to sell the film on the director's name as much as the cast. Those films get made, and there's a market and there's an audience, and there are distributors to distribute those films, and you just have to adjust the budget accordingly, because you're not going to get this much money. So and things like so you should be talking to people who sell and distribute those kind of films. So when the director comes in and says, "I'm going to use an unknown cast," that shouldn't be a surprise in the room, because the people know, because we know this director, that's how they make films. They've got a track record of making films like that, and they make their money back. It's okay. If you have no track record and you come in and go, I don't want to use a named cast, and you're talking to sales and distribution people who are working with a model where casting is an important component, you're in a slightly different environment. Would that be fair? I mean,
that's absolutely right.
Who are you talking to? That's research.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, unless you've made the best film ever, there's always going to be weak points in your project. I think you need to know what they are before you go into a pitch, so that you can counteract them, and perhaps and for instance, if a director says, "Oh, I don't want to use any names at all," well, you have to think. I mean, if you're a producer, for instance, okay, well, what does that mean to me? I mean, is the director strong enough for me to sell that film without cast? Because actually that could be it could end up being the hook for the movie. If it could be if that director is a strong director. If Ben Affleck now goes on to make a film with unknown actors, well, that's that you can see that working, because he's such a big name in that area now, and you often hear it. When you've left the room and in the distribution or in a sales agent, and they start talking about the project, they'll go straight away to that weak point. They'll say, or you'll come out of a screening at a film in a market, and you'll say, well, actually, it has cast, and the director's quite well known. But it's probably only a 2-star movie, so that's it's not that good a movie. Or you can say, actually, it's a great movie, but there's just no name, there's no one in it. And we did I have seen in one of my old jobs, we had actually a 5-point system where we actually marked projects, and it's very, very basic. Is it a good film? Is it a good or well-known director? Does it have cast? Does it have genre? And we'd also mark off things, so for instance, if there was this is quite cynical, but if it was something like there's a death of a child in the film, then or there's some subject matter that you're uncomfortable, and we'd actually rate films before we saw them on that, so we could prioritise which films in a market we would go and see, or we'd show interest in. And so it's good to know what your weak points are.
The good thing to go back to, definitely. Will, with a short film, so if you're starting out, so this is really, all this stuff's really useful. I know it probably seems a bit like that might relate more to feature films, but it's good to think about that now, because this is, obviously, if you're making shorts, that's where you might want to go. But how would you say with casting and in short films, you're pitching ideas, is that something that would come into a short film pitch? And is it a good idea to sort of think about up-and-coming people? What would impress you in a short film pitch?
I mean, I think the first thing to say about shorts, obviously, is, and it's really, really useful talking about features, because you're all going that that way, I'm sure. But in shorts, obviously, there are certain things that don't apply so much in that you don't really package together a short like you would a feature and take it to market and kind of exploit the assets that are attached or not attached, because in this country at any rate schemes are kind of fixed, and you'll be brought on to and commissioned to make a short before cast are attached. Having said that, there are people that operate in the private sector and through who will want to, no one's ever looking for a massive return on a short film because it isn't any, it's not economically viable in that way. But I've noticed, and maybe this has always been the case, but I'm just more attuned to it now, that a lot of good, solid UK character actors are doing more and more, and actually stars are doing more and more short film work.
Right.
And the feedback I get back time and time again from agents is that if the script's good enough, they'll always be interested, because actors like to do different things, possibly sometimes against the advice of their agent. I don't know.
I guess this could be a 4-day shoot.
It could be a 4-day shoot. They might be in the country. They might have a pre-existing relationship with a filmmaker from something they worked on before. The short that won the BAFTA 2 years ago had Michael Fassbender in it and Liam Cunningham. I've seen short recently with John Hurt in it. They do it, and the great thing about the UK is that we have some of the best acting training and acting talent in the world. I saw a short with Toby Jones in it the other day. You don't really have an excuse for having bad actors in a short, I don't think, anymore. It might be that you failed to get a good performance out of an actor. It's always, once you've seen the film, it's almost impossible to tell. But there's a great wealth of really strong, good character actors in this country that I think are willing to do short films if the short is right for them. In terms of pitching for shorts, it doesn't happen often, but actually maybe this is slightly tenuous, but I think often in this country you're applying for funding and you're applying with written documents, essentially written pitches, and you will often have to give a synopsis and a treatment and talk about a director's vision, a writer's vision, a producer's vision. Have you thought about distribution? You might be a lot of the time in the schemes that you used to work on, there would be interviews for the final. That is all pitching. As far as I'm concerned, I do various bits of assessment for various different schemes. 9 times out of 10, the written quality of the pitches, a one sheet, a synopsis, a treatment, a writer's vision, not good enough. Not coherent enough, for anything from bad spelling, punctuation and grammar, all the way through to completely mixed comparison films, through to outlandish suggestions for cast that would never do it in a million years, all the way through to budget level. So in a sense, some of the stuff that these guys are saying about features really can translate into the short film arena when you're pitching for funding. You're just less likely to be doing it in the environment that it happens in feature films, much more likely to be doing it in a written context. There's no excuse for misspelling the title of a film you're making a comparison with. It simply isn't. Just get a friend to read it.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that. It's all that stuff. All that stuff for me is pitching and having a really good, tight one. Director's vision. I'm sick to death of reading about kind of colour palettes, which is it's all fine. It's all fine, but that crafted paragraph should be a beautiful piece of writing about you and your film.
So I guess it's good to have like a 1-line or 2-line thing saying what it's about, and then a bigger it's like sort of paragraph, and then a longer treatment.
I think log lines are really useful for many reasons. I think if you're a writer, I think with shorts as well, it so often is a very singular idea. It so often is a story about one character or a two-hander really, and it does. I think short films can have an essence. With genre as well in feature films, a good log line's a great thing, because as we might call it, you can call it reductive, and it doesn't work in every case. But again, back to this idea: if you've got a big, strong hook and a big genre, you need to be able to communicate the essence of something very quickly. And I think a good log line should be it should absolutely leave you wanting to read a script. I kind of tend to glaze over slightly when people give me a verbal synopsis of a story, because it never does quite justice. It's being a bit pithy and a bit creative and a bit dazzling about your project, and kind of sucker punching someone from the get-go. That's the real skill in that sense, I think.
So I suppose if you've got that quick kind of 2-line thing, then you have that. So anyone that you want to talk about the project, that'll carry you through from you know, HODs you want to get on board, or
Yeah.
casting, or
Yeah.
or festival programmers,
Yeah.
kind of need to be able to say it really
Yeah.
quickly.
I
don't
think
you?
I've got a gem of a short film
Yeah.
idea. It's about I'm not going to give you because I can't think of anything great, which is why I don't write off the top of my head. I've trapped myself now, but you know I've got a really great short idea. It's about this guy X who ends up X. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. That's what an incredible scenario.
Okay.
I'd love to see your
So it's
script.
kind of like a person, what their problem scenario is,
Yeah,
and what they have to
all
do.
those kinds of classic script writing development questions reduced down to a kind of an essence, I suppose.
So what? Yeah, I mean, if they like, what else should if they've got to have all those written things and like different lengths and stuff. That if anyone asks for something, like if you have to meet someone to talk about your idea, is there anything else that you should bring? Like, I think we sort of mentioned references to other films. Is that good, or does it put you off sometimes?
I think. I mean, I like what Will said before about how you can use cast, and bring those connotations to the table, and you can do it. There's it's a double-edged sword. You can do it to actually talk about the commerciality of the project, but you can also do it to sort of paint a picture of a character.
Yeah.
And I think that comps can do that as well. I mean, you can say, this is. I mean, I think you need to be just very, very clear when you're using them, how you use them. So you might say, well, it's going to be shot a little bit in this style. So the person who's listening to the pitch knows straight away that it isn't going to be that film. It's just going to have this element of the film in it.
Yeah.
So you're sort of using it as a sort of using comps. You can use them as a palette to sort of build a picture up of the movie. As well as as long as you're clear, also use it to actually explain where the film will go and how it should be distributed. For instance, you wouldn't say oh well, we see it as a kind of Star Trek when clearly the film's a $100,000 $100 budget movie, because obviously it's not going to go on and do Star Trek. But you can. So I think it's just being very, very, very careful and thinking beforehand. Doing your research, making sure you spell the titles correctly, and just sort of having a think. Well, how will this make the project look? And can I deliver that?
And should people mention the audience who they think would like it?
Well, I would say yes, because that's where I am. But
and with
I
shorts,
think I mean, comparables for me, I think you have to be incredibly careful. I think you have to be budget realistic, and I think you have to be. But I actually think it's a good answer to who's the audience for this film. It's the kind of audience who would watch X, and in doing that, you're kind of there's a little bit of play in terms of budget and things like that. But you can usually get people to go, yeah, well, if someone would go and see that, I can see that they would go and see this. So I think if you want to think of a way to answer the question, who's the audience for this film, comparables are very often useful. I think you have to be, the budget thing is kind of a big thing. If you come in and say, it's Goodfellas meets Scarface, and it's like, but you don't have Robert De Niro and you don't have Martin Scorsese directing, and you don't, you're doing a 150 grand East End gangster film, then I think you need to be a little bit careful. I'd also be careful about referencing films that people have made who you're talking to, unless you know the kind of relationship they had with that film, If they got divorced or lost their house or whatever, I don't know. But of course, you need to do your research and know as much about the person in the room as possible.
That's it. So you really think about who you're pitching to.
Absolutely.
And also whether they've read your script anyway. You might be telling them something they already know, or they might have already made a film that's really similar. Or
and there may be a film that really captures your project, and it really captures sort of essence and perhaps even the audience as well. But it's an abject failure, and so I would say probably try and avoid using that as a reference point if you're talking to a distributor, because they'll because you'll leave the room and that will be the weak point.
And indeed, people's benchmarks of failure are very different. If a film can break even and make a bit of a profit, and some people would see that as an abject failure.
Absolutely.
So you have what kind of expectations of return are the people?
I think that's an excellent point, because we have movies that people think are failures because they work in exhibition. So, and yet those films may have gone on and been huge hits. We had a film called St. George's Day, which took no money at all, in theatres last year, but has gone on to be our biggest selling DVD of the last sort of 10 years. And so, you know, so it's, you know, not always easy to know this kind of stuff because it's insider knowledge, but you just need to try your best.
And I guess there's the other films that are kind of festival successes that maybe didn't make any money, but actually some people in the industry will really respect that. So
Yeah, critical success and economic success are two different things, yeah.
Can I just say, with regards to shorts, obviously the audience is slightly different. It tends to be festival audiences, talent trackers, agents, people working in short film. But strangely, you very rarely hear a short filmmaker reference another short when they're talking about their short. They more often than not will reference a feature film. And I'd really like to see more of people referencing other shorts that have had success. I mean, obviously that means you have to get knowledgeable about shorts, but I think if you're in the short film game, that goes without saying. But I think it's a missed opportunity, and obviously you don't want to be too derivative. But I think you could say, look, you know,
I think you need to show that you watch them. I used to actually always ask people that when I was on selecting shorts for funding. I every single time said, what shorts have you seen? What short films do you like? As a kind of test of, you know, how much they've been out there watching stuff and thinking about it when they're writing their own. And when someone said, oh, I haven't really seen any shorts and was just referencing features, it did put me off a little bit. So, and again, that's just about thinking, like knowing about the area that you're working in.
Another thing that you'll get asked for if you make any kind of formal application to a scheme, or if you're developing a short project in the UK, more often than not, is your show reel, of course, which needs to be. I prefer to receive a show reel where the films are individual and it's an example of it's limited to what you would say is your best work. Show reels that are cut together with the greatest hits of your short film work. I tend to get a bit anxious about that because I think, what are you hiding? Why isn't the full film good enough to show? Again, that's another form of your pitching package.
So as well as kind of your idea that you need to be able to talk about, do you also need to be able to kind of think about your profile, so that I suppose, you know, if you see someone at a party at a festival and it's at like 11 o'clock at night, you don't want to sort of chew their ear off for too long, so you might want to be able to sort of, would you then follow it up by sending a link to your work or something like that?
Yeah, I think, again, that's the social environment where you have to gauge whether the interest is genuine or not. I'd say the same about pitching with a small P as I would about networking with a small N. You know, we don't like it in this country. People say networking and people run them. It doesn't have to be that onerous. It can just be nice and friendly and generous. The problem is in the UK is that we're masters of subtext and never of actually just saying what we think. So, you know, you kind of have to have your social radar attuned, I would say. But I think, you know, if someone seems genuinely interested, then follow up with an email or they might say, I'd love to see your show reel. You know, forcing your stuff on other people is difficult.
I think, you know, I think basically if you don't know, if you're in a conversation with someone and it's not in a structured environment and you don't know how much time you've got, ask, can I have 2 minutes of your time? And if they say yes, they've given you permission to take up 2 minutes of your time. Do what you do well in 2 minutes. Say thank you, get the business card and get out of the conversation. Because what you're showing there is you're showing confident, professional behaviour.
Respect.
In showing respect for that busy person's time. And they'll just go, well, one thing I know about this person is that they respect my time and they present themselves in a business-like manner. And I would say always follow up on everything. I mean, business cards are great, but they're so 20th century. You know, they go in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. If you send me an email, it's in my computer. I can find you really quickly.
And I love a filmmaker with a good website. So that if I lose their business card, I can remember their name. I think it's kind of borderline criminal now not to have a good website as
even
a
if it's
filmmaker.
quite basic.
Just
to
it's
show
your
what you've
window.
done.
It's part of your personal pitch.
Or even like a Vimeo page with just your work on. So it's really easy to look at and see what they've done.
I'd love to know where your film's played. It's very easy to write a list if you've won any prizes.
Keep it really simple. You know. I think you're right. I think all of it's kind of, you know, it's about pitching is partly just about having some social skills and empathising with who you're talking to, because, I mean, if you start a really long pitch, then, you know, sometimes people are a bit tired or they've listened to lots of other things all day. So it's kind of thinking about how much you would be able to actually digest if someone's telling you their idea as well. But I was going to ask, like, how, in terms of other people, what's a good way to get the most out of pitching to people and the responses that you get from them, or the advice, and making sure that that's actually useful to you in some way? Because there's no point just going around telling people your idea. There's got to be a point to it, and sometimes that's that you might want them to be interested because you want them to fund it or get involved, but how do you make sure that you actually get some kind of useful response?
I think there's one thing is that the film that your project is rubbish is only one reason that people won't want to or can't make the film, and that's the only that and how and presenting the project are the only things that you have control over. So if it's rubbish, don't make it. Do something better, or do something else. Yeah. If the pitch, you just need to work on it. I mean, it's all prep and work. There might be 50 other reasons why someone can't make the project, and they vary from everything like, well, we just did that last year. We did just something too similar. We know something that's in production that we want to go with that it's too close to. All of the above. Companies changing tack. We want to finance comedies. Whatever. You have no control over those things.
No.
So you should take some confidence in that. The thing that you have responsibility for is making sure that your project is ready and as good as it can be to present to people. I don't know if that answers that point, but it's...
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
I think that, no, someone saying no doesn't mean your project sucks. It could...
So you shouldn't give up on the first
shouldn't give
person.
up and try and glean what that reason is that they're...
What happens...
I think you can be a good pitcher, but you can also be a good person to be pitched to. And I've always tried to give feedback and be constructive.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can... you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but the same, and if you got, and if someone says to you, oh well, it's not quite the right fit for me, which is or something like that, it probably means that they don't want to tell you exactly. They don't want to actually tell you the real reason, but they may come back with something that bowls you over, that's actually really constructive and useful, particularly if your project is in a position where it can be changed, where, for instance, you don't have set cast, and they may say, well, actually, we don't feel that cast is going to work for us, and you say, well, actually, why? And you can actually get some feedback that could help you move the project along.
What should you do if someone says, well, I've heard this idea loads of times before, it's really unoriginal?
But I would say thank you. I would say thank you for your time. I mean, there are people who are rude, hostile, ignorant, and stupid in the industry, and there are people who are incredibly generous with their time, really know what they're doing, and really want to engage with new stories and talent. And there are the good people as well. And if someone is rude and ignorant, then I would just be polite and say thank you for your time and bye, and just get into the next meeting, because it's clearly not going to be a useful. They probably haven't even got any influence to do anything. They're going to be somebody who has to answer to 50 other people, and So let's talk about you and why you're not happy in your job. And but anyway.
Yeah. So I guess it's being a little bit thick-skinned and talking to lots of different people and getting some different angles of feedback before you completely give up on something.
Because your mum's going to say you're brilliant, you're a genius.
And hearing what people are saying to you, hearing what people are saying. Taking the feedback, which is always hard, and then adapting to survive, I suppose. And if you've been told by 4 different people that work in shorts or features or sales that they've seen this idea before, or they know that there are 2 films in active development, you're going to listen to them.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people don't.
No,
and just go ahead regardless, and end up with something that they can't, because they come back to you.
I think it's really good to develop your peer group, people whose opinion you trust and know who can give you good feedback, like constructive feedback. But they're going to tell you what they think does and doesn't work.
I mean, I guess they're kind of being your audience, and ultimately those same people might be the people that will either watch or not watch your film. Very established screenwriters do that. They have they have people who they trust to their opinion. Top A-list screenwriters who I've talked to have that peer group who they'll go, can you have a look at this? Can you have a think about that? Yeah, that's good. Do we have any questions? This one, do we need to wait for the mic? It's on there. Yeah, thanks.
Hiya. I was just wondering, when you're actually pitching, is there
if you're doing it in an informal environment, let's say a festival or something like this, where you've actually had the chance to catch someone's eye, does it look a little bit weak to just be on your own? Is it good if you're going to like a short film festival to take your writer or your director or your producer just to go as like a team of 3? Does it look a little bit underprepared if it's just you running around on your own, kind of going, oh, can I grab you for 10 minutes?
No, not necessarily. I don't think. I think it depends on your personality, depends on the kind of festival you're at. I mean, you know, lots of festivals have wonderful atmospheres. They're very democratic and open and friendly. I don't think I would care if you approached me. I don't know about these guys, if you were in a team of 4 or if it was just you. It's just nice to have a nice conversation. And again, I would try and reframe your thinking. Everyone needs to reframe their thinking slightly about, you know, I'm not here pitching, I'm just here socialising. And if it can't, you know, and if you do need to beg 2 minutes of someone's time, that's fine. The pressure might be on slightly bit more. But if you're just at a bar after a screening of a short film, then try and let that conversation happen organically. And I guarantee that at some point, if you say I'm a director or a writer, they'll say, what are you working on at the moment? Anything interesting? At which point, there's your pitch. But then when you say, oh yeah, what about, yeah, oh yeah, here's my project, and you know, you can be just funny and smart about it.
And keep it brief.
Yeah, it's a 10-minute John project. I might have Ben Wisher attached, but I don't know yet. And yeah, I'm looking for 10 grand. You know, at Encounter Short Film Festival, that's going to feel funny.
And everybody wants like a little taste, a little bit. So if you, in the same way that log lines and synopsis and treatment, all this stuff's vital. I mean, you know, the fact is that that most people don't want to read scripts until they have understood whether their time is well spent reading the script. They want to see something. So, you know, a lot of people would want to, are you a producer? Yeah, so that you give them some kind of understanding about the project will then kind of say, they'll kind of, oh, I'd like to meet the director, I'd like to talk about the, you know, so it's not always great to go around mob-handed and yeah, I think the answer is no, you don't need everybody there all the time. In fact, that's your job, is to not have everyone all there all the time.
Sometimes it's good to not have everyone there at the same time, and you can talk about all the different elements.
I think you want to make friends with people.
And you make friends.
Yeah, and you kind of, I always think of it as you pocket people, not in a.
Well, it's when you have a rather overzealous director that just wants to be involved with everything, is to try and pick and choose when to.
Yeah.
That sounds like a separate conversation that you need to have with your director.
Are there any other questions? So there's one there.
As a new filmmaker, if you have a couple of shorts and you're developing a feature, is it acceptable or kind of industry acceptable to essentially cold email distributors, sales agents to kind of send on your details with links, or is it kind of, would you not really see a response from doing that?
That's a good question.
It is a good question. It's a tough one to answer as well, because I think it would depend on the company and the person that you were trying to contact. I think it's quite important to find out who that person is. You know, we occasionally on our info email at work, we'll get a filmmaker sending us a link to a project, and that's a very bad start. I think you can at least find out who that acquisitions person is. I think it's also, you know, it's good to know not just the identity of that person, but also, you know, sort of get an understanding of which department and who you should be contacting, depending on who you, depending on what organisation you're approaching. So if it's a distribution company, you'll be looking for their head of acquisitions, or perhaps even an acquisitions manager who's more likely going to open the email because their job would be to actually perhaps to look at sort of like fledgling projects, as opposed to the head of acquisitions having a more sort of management role in the department. In terms of whether you get a response, I couldn't answer that. It really depends. I mean, I think the email has to, you have to imagine that people are going to get these emails. They're going to probably get a lot of them, and they need to be quite clear and very sort of easy to read. So if you send somebody an email that has, 10 attachments, including, the script, your life story, a mood board, all of that kind of stuff. It's, I think, what you want to do is sort of introduce yourself, think about the best, your best work, and again, like take all of the advice that's come out of this panel about how, to best sort of structure your pitch and what elements you should bring in and not bring in. So if it's a if it's a distributor in a feature film, then you want to sort of be, you're asking them to take a chance on you as a first-time filmmaker. You need to, put yourself across in a way where they're going to understand where you're coming from and where you might be able to fit in their slate. It's very, very, very difficult. I realise that, but I think all of that will help. Because we get some crazy emails from people who you read the email and you just think they're just mad, just sort of like rambling prose about the project and how passionate they are about it and how even their mum said it's going to be a hit and all of this kind of stuff. You've got to you've got to be professional and concise.
This guy here.
There's one there, yeah.
With the growth of the internet and a lot of young filmmakers building up their audiences and their experience online, how does that translate as a producer when going into now pitch? So as opposed to pitching someone who maybe hadn't had an online following or a lot of views, with someone who's built a big audience on YouTube or other online platforms, how does the people who commission today in today's market look at that person who's DIYing it almost themselves before they come to the table to speak to commissioners?
Right, so are people taking notice of that kind of...
Yeah, there obviously is now sort of online plays an important part in the release of feature films. So for instance, I've worked with Noel Clarke before, and he comes to the table with a very intimidating online presence in terms of Twitter and sort of general intimidating presence in general, actually, and he works really hard. He's such a hard worker in maintaining contact with direct contact with his audience, and that's definitely something that is important. And and a lot of feature film companies now are bringing in online agencies to promote at an early stage in the sort of campaign process in order to promote a movie. In terms of accessing content, that's a little trickier. Obviously, film distribution companies they're in the business of monetizing content. And we could have a whole other conversation about putting stuff out through VOD and iTunes and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of actually sort of actually bringing in, say, a young filmmaker who's made a lot of movies that people are watching on YouTube, we'd still want to see that they can actually bring that to the commercial big screen, and that's a much trickier question, I think. But I definitely think, that. It doesn't. If you particularly if you're a director and a personality, and you should always be thinking about developing the sort of online personality of your movie at a very early stage. Setting up a Twitter account for it, all that kind of stuff. And it could, if it takes off, could become quite an effective part of your pitch. That actually we already have so many followers on Facebook. We plan to do this during the production, where we're going to capture incidents on set, or maybe feed out little clips on a YouTube channel and all that kind of stuff. And I think it makes you look like, because I think from us it always helps if the producers have a good knack of sort of promoting themselves during the production, because there'll come a point where we can take over that, and it can work into the actual campaign to market the release itself.
Thank you.
Cool. We're going to have to wrap up now, but just actually really quickly, do any of you know of any good websites or books or any places that you can find examples of good pitches or resources about pitching? Is it useful?
Can I say something else instead of that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Write it down, write the pitch down and learn it so well that you can forget your lines, because then you can look people in the eye when you're talking to them. Because if you're trying to remember stuff and you're looking up at the ceiling, it looks like you're trying to remember stuff. And if you write it down and learn it so well you can forget it, then you can have a conversation. Doesn't matter how nervous you are or whatever, you can look people in the eye while you're talking to them.
That's a really good
And once you know it inside out, you can then make it look natural.
Excellent. Any other final tips, resources?
Just to say that you could go and have a look at sales agents' websites, because obviously they're in the business of pitching movies. You'd be surprised actually how terrible some of their synopses are. So I think you sort of approach them with a sort of quite a critical eye, but you might just see some tips about how they actually construct information on the movies that they're selling in, and they're selling them into distributors, so they're selling them into industry professionals. Which is, of course, what you all hope to be doing in the future.
Great.
I was going to say be super friendly without being hyperactive.
Okay.
and just try and instill the sense of passion that you have or should have for your project in the person that you're speaking to, because that's what you've got to communicate ultimately, I think.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Virgin Media Shorts, championing undiscovered talent.